above and beyond life just doesn't happen. It's got to be intentionally carved out in your spiritual disciplines. And I'm going to talk about a few key areas of our life as leaders that we should really be prioritizing when it comes to spiritual disciplines to live above and beyond life. And I was just getting lunch ready earlier, and as I was getting it ready, I thought, oh, this is like being disciplined, and this is like being told how important it is to prioritize these things in your life. Because I was getting lunch ready last night. Rachel cooked pork. What was it, Rachel? Pork something or other, like a pork roll or a loin, or
it
what do you call it?
Not before, but it was a pork loin roast, I think.
Pork loin roast with crackling across the top. Oh, so good. And so Rach brought some leftovers to the office today, and so we're getting them ready. And I had a few slices of pork on my plate, and it was pork and coleslaw. And so I got the pork out of the container, heated it up in the microwave, and then I was walking out of the kitchen, and Rach says, hang on a minute, what about the coleslaw? I was like, yeah, well, maybe I said I'll get it later with no intention of getting it later. I was just going to eat the pork. And Rach said, well, you're an adult. You need to eat some salad. You just can't eat meat. It's like, okay, that's fair enough. You're right. And as I'm eating it, before we got on this call, I was just so thankful that, Rachel said to me, hey, eat some coleslaw because it is good for you. Even though I couldn't be bothered initially, I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm eating this coleslaw. Yeah, this is good for me. It's doing me good, even though I didn't really want to have to, commit to it when I was getting my lunch ready. And so I think that really sets up the thought about being disciplined about the things that matter, because discipline's about doing the things that sometimes we'd rather just not have to do. And so to live an above and beyond life as leaders, we do have to be the ones that set the example and do the things that maybe others might not necessarily want to do. But here we go. We've actually got to call others to do the things that matter. And we've got to put ourselves out there and say, hey, we know this is the right thing to do for you. And I guess I'm commending Rachel on being a good leader. Hey, this is the right thing to do for you. You need to do it. You just have to do it. Be an adult, be a grown-up, be a mature leader and do what's right. And so I wanted to, in my text out about this earlier today, I said, hey, this might be difficult to hear, might be challenging, but it's important for us as leaders to hear this. And I'm really thankful that as a leader in church life, I've had other leaders who've led me, who've called me to account on these things. And as much as I might have struggled to hear them, I'm so thankful now that I apply them into my life and they make a difference and they help me in my leadership. So I want to talk about three key areas of our life. And these are like the three big broad categories that everyone has and everyone has to deal with when it comes to being disciplined. And the first is time. The second is finances. And the third is power or your autonomy or your independence. They're the three key areas of life. You can pretty much put everything else under those three areas: how you spend and how you discipline with your time, how you spend and how you discipline with your finances, and how you apply and outwork the autonomy of your life, the power that you've been given. Some of us have a little, some of us have a lot, but we have been called to steward those areas of our life in a way that is kingdom first, above and beyond. So let's look at these quickly. Time and finances and power. I'm going to talk about the principle of kingdom first time or above and beyond time and how we apply that in our lives. So when it comes to time, the principle is all about, I want to talk about this, about Sabbath. Sabbath. This is what it's all about. Sabbath is about taking an allotted amount of time and giving it to God. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 15, this is from the 10 Commandments. It says, no working on the Sabbath, keep it holy to God. I command you. It says work 6 days, doing everything you have to do on those 6 days. But on the seventh day, it's the Sabbath, a rest day, no work, not for you, not for your son, not for your daughter, not for your servant, not for your maid, not for your ox, not for your donkey, not for any of your animals, and not even the foreigner who's visiting your town. That way your servants and maids will get the same rest as you. Don't ever forget, listen to this, that you were slaves in Egypt, and God, your God, got you out of there in a powerful show of strength. That's why God commands you to observe the Sabbath day of rest. Sometimes we think that we've been set free from our workaholism, our past, the sin of selfishness, the sin of materialism, so that we can be living a life in Christ, living a life of freedom in Him. But then we do the same thing in our faith-filled life we do the same thing in our Christian walk. We fill it up to overflowing, doing the things that we think we need to do to accomplish the things that God's asked us to accomplish. But first and foremost, he says, hey, give me my time first, because I'm going to supernaturally provide for you the time you need to do everything I've asked you to do. So to not do that is actually to distrust God's word on your life. It's actually to take away the authority of God and the power of God and potential of God to be outworked in your life by taking over and doing the things that God has said he would do through your life. You know, even Jesus says this in Mark chapter 2:27. He says, the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. You know, so we don't follow it out of legalism, but we give it to God because we know that with that one day, God can do more than we can with our 7. And so the practice of that, I mean, I've only got a few minutes to share the last few thoughts here, but I would encourage you to listen to and read the work and listen to the podcast of Pete Scazzero. And you can Google him and you can find his stuff. He's quite prolific and he talks a lot about Sabbath. And his definition of Sabbath is to stop, to rest, to delight in God, and to contemplate, to think on the things of God. So it doesn't mean you necessarily just do nothing, but you do the things that allow you to give your day back to God or your time back to God. And so I won't go into the details of how that works, but there's a huge amount of work on that. And Pete Scazzero is someone who has written prolifically, but also in a modern context and can apply it to a busy modern day life and ministry. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. So the principle of time is giving God that day, trusting him with it. And the practice is, I would encourage you to encourage the people that you lead to give that day to God by being in church. If you're a minister in church, you can still give time to yourself to rest on a Sunday. You might be serving for a few hours on a Sunday, but you can certainly give the rest of the day to your Sabbath, or take a separate day that you allow yourself to find rest in. So that's time. I would encourage you to be above and beyond leader in your time to give it to God. And the other area in our lives is our financial world. And the principle there is from Matthew chapter 6, verse 19, which says, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves cannot break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. And so this is a great promise that when we give the reign, the rule, the authority of our financial world over to God, then we can receive everything he wants for our life in the area of our finances. So that's the principle. It's a kingdom principle. But what does that look like? Well, it begins with practically giving to God that which is his. Just like with the Sabbath, we give God what is his, a day unto him. And with finances, we give God what is his, which is the tithe, which is the first 10% of any financial increase into our life through the local church. That's the principle. That's the practice of tithing. And, I love the verse in Haggai chapter 1, verse 9, which says this. It says, you hope for rich harvests. In other words, the people of God, you understood the principle of favor. You hoped for rich harvests, but they were poor. And when you brought your harvest home, I blew it away. Why? I love that, because sometimes we do think we're doing all the right things. And God says, hang on a minute, there's a reason why things aren't working out the way that they're working out. He says this, verse 9, because my house lies in ruins, says the Lord of heaven's armies, while all of you are busy building your own fine houses. And, that's quite a challenge. But it's, again, above and beyond leadership. Kingdom first leadership says God's kingdom first above my own preferences, my own agenda, my own desires. And when I submit and surrender my time and my finances to God, I receive in kind. I receive more time than I need to do all he's asked me to do, and more finances than I need to do all I want to do. I've actually got enough to help others to do what they want to do and resource others in their financial world as well. So above and beyond leaders, we're kingdom first when it comes to our time. We're kingdom first when it comes to our financial world. And finally, and probably most importantly, as I wrap up, we're actually kingdom first when it comes to our power or our authority. And so the principle here is from Psalm 37, verse 3-5, which says this: keep trusting in the Lord and do what is right in his eyes. Do what is right in his eyes. Fix your heart on the promises of God and you will be secure. feasting on his faithfulness. Make God the utmost delight and pleasure of your life. Did you hear that? Make God the utmost delight and pleasure of your life, and he will provide for you what you desire most. Give God the right to direct your life. That's where you surrender power to God. Give God the right to direct your life. And verse 5 finishes and it says, as you trust him along the way, you'll find he pulled it off perfectly. And this is the principle, that as we let God direct our lives, we begin to see our lives unfold in a way that are a picture of the power of God at work in our life, not our own power exerted in every area of our life. And Matthew chapter 16 reiterates that thought. This is the principle. It says, Jesus went to work on his disciples. He says, anyone who intends to come with me anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. We have to let Jesus lead. If we want to follow Jesus, it makes sense, right? We have to let him lead. It says, you are not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Follow me, and I'll show you how. And he goes on to say, in the Message paraphrase, it says, self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to finding yourself, your true self. What kind of deal is it to get everything you want but lose yourself? What could you ever trade your soul for? In other words, some versions say, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? Sometimes we fight so hard to hold on to our own power, to hold on to our autonomous living, to hold on to our independence, when the kingdom first life says, I'm willing to give all that over so that Jesus leads my life and he directs my life and he has power over everything that I do. Now, that's the principle. Now, as I wrap up, this is how we practice that. And this is a big challenge for people, because time and finance, we can often outwork those things in the privacy of our own world. So we can tithe to through the local church, and no one has to know about that. We can just do it through direct deposit, and our time, whether or not we take a Sabbath, many people wouldn't even know. Maybe our spouse, maybe our family, but otherwise we could say, yeah, look, we're doing well with our time, with our finances. But when it comes to ceding power to others, it's the kind of thing that it's obvious if it's not happening in your life, because the practice of submission happens through relationships with other people. Because you can say, oh yeah, look, I'm submitted to the things of God, I'm submitted to Jesus. But what we see outworked here in reality is you can just be saying that and it can not be happening. And so Paul addresses this to the church in Corinth, and they were a church that really wasn't submitting to the authority of God in everything they did as a church. And so Paul called them out on it. And he says this in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 33, and then it jumps over to chapter 11 verse 1. He says this, he says, follow my example. This is Paul talking to the church. He says, follow my example. He says, for I try to please everyone in all things rather than putting my liberty first. So Paul's saying that I'm ceding my freedom and my power and my autonomy by setting the example for you to follow. He says, I sincerely attempt to do anything I can so that others may be saved. And I want you, this is verse 1 in chapter 11, I want you to pattern your lives after me. He says to the church, follow me. I want you to follow me. He says, just as I pattern my life after Christ. Other versions say, follow me as I follow Christ. And I give you full credit for always keeping me in mind as you follow carefully the substance of my instructions. And so here we see this powerful dynamic where we are submitting to and ceding power to the authority of Jesus when we are able to identify spiritual leadership here on earth and follow the pattern of those leaders that God has placed over our lives. And so I just want to encourage you to be the kind of kingdom first people, kingdom first leaders that are okay to follow the leaders who God has placed over you, but also call people who you lead to follow your example. Now, we're not perfect, and neither was Paul, but this is the kingdom model, that we're to follow Jesus by following others that Jesus has placed in authority over our life. And so that's a challenge, right? I think that's actually quite a big challenge. And it's quite, it's quite a strong thought. Hey, what I'm basically saying is give God, a day a week and trust him with what you can't do with that day and the things that you're going to miss out on doing. If you don't, you're really not ceding authority to God. You're really not putting kingdom first. And that's hard, but it's true. Secondly, tithing. I'm saying, hey, you are the leader. You are a kingdom first leader when you tithe, when you prioritize giving God 10% of your increase. Because again, maybe it doesn't look like you can make it work in your financial world without it, but this is kingdom first leadership. So I get it's tough and it's difficult. And finally, I'm saying, hey, submit to the authority that God's placed in your world. And again, that's a challenge to our very independent, very selfish, very my way kind of culture. But I'm saying as kingdom leaders, that's the countercultural approach that we have to lead with.